Once you understand that germs don't cause disease and that the entire germ theory is a lie, your whole life changes. Now, I am gonna just have another free flow of consciousness, and no, this is not a conspiracy theory at all. This is just getting down to real logic and looking at the basis for proving that things like viruses as well as bacteria are the actual cause of disease, and why I don't buy it anymore and why you shouldn't either. So the first thing that we can use is the burden of proof fallacy, where those making the claim must have proof. If they're making a claim that a virus is making you sick, they need to be able to prove this as a fact and make it a repeatable experiment, a repeatable thing that you can do over and over and over again. So when I say things on here like viruses haven't been proven to exist, it's because when you look at the foundational claims of how a virus was isolated, they've never actually been able to do it. What does that mean? Being able to isolate a virus would mean taking human snot and separating the so-called virus from a sick person down in its simplest form, isolating it from something else. Isolating something from something else simply means separation. These so-called viruses have never actually been proven to exist because what is done during these experiments, or so-called experiments, it's more like just playing around with test tubes and cell culture plates and making a mess inside them. What is done is they take the human snot and then they assume that there's a virus that is present, and then they treat these plates with fetal bovine serum, antibiotics, streptomycin, and a few other drugs. And they put them into a plate with monkey kidney cells or vero cells and other forms of cell lines that are common in scientific research. In no way, shape, or form do they ever actually do the scientific method by creating an independent variable from something else. They are essentially just making an assumption. And it's all great and all to make an assumption if you really want to, but you have to make the burden of proof if you're gonna then take your assumption and start implementing things like harmful pharmaceuticals that are petroleum-based medicine, as well as things like vaccines, which have aluminum, mercury, and other types of proven poisons which can cause harm to people as well as babies. And so when you start to unravel the real cause of disease, and that it's not a virus or it's not even a bacteria don't make you sick. Bacteria are actually the good guys, where they're the theoretical cleaner-uppers of disease, where bacteria are present where disease is. It doesn't actually mean that they're making you sick. They're actually there to help you, right? That's where the gut microbiome comes into play. You want to have a strong and healthy gut microbiome so that you have microbes to help absorb food and, be able to function. The terrain model is called the terrain model because it's a model for what is presented outside of this germ theory. If a virus doesn't make you sick because it's never been proven to exist, and if bacteria don't make us sick, or if fungi doesn't make us sick, or if things like parasites don't make us sick, which parasites are also theorized in the terrain community to be cleaner uppers. They exist to pick up toxic heavy metals that we are consuming all the time, like with things like in our skies. You know, we have those things. They're called chemtrails, or if you want to call it a contrail, be my guest. But it is a chemtrail, and it's like things like barium, aluminum, strontium, all these metals that aren't natural to being in the human environment. And so when we're being sprayed on like insects, you know, similar to how they spray on our food, they spray pesticides, they spray all this stuff over us so it gets in our food, it means that we are consuming it whether we're conscious to it or not. And so that's where parasites will come into play. If you're not constantly thinking of being in a state of detoxification and being in a state of a healthy terrain, then you're going to have lots of parasites, and they're not necessarily invading you or doing harm to you. They're more or less taking the heavy metals that are in your environment and helping you. So that's food for thought, or fruit for thought, like that my influencer friend, whoever, I forget his name, I think it's Zach Kerner. Fruit for thought, food for thought. But yeah, the reason you shouldn't believe in the germ theory is because it's never been proven to exist. Things like antibodies are not actually proven to exist. And so outside of the germ theory, when you look at the world like the terrain model, it brings a lot of questions as to like what is actually causing all these forms of disease, all these symptoms. Well, symptoms themselves are the body expressing to you that something is wrong, per se, with the terrain. And so, as I'm walking through this chiropractic program, and I'm learning about all these disease labels, it calls to question, it begs the question, everything that I'm learning. Like things like rheumatoid arthritis that are infection based, and things, I mean, degenerative joint disease is different. It's more of a degenerative thing where your environment itself becomes degenerated over time due to things like age and not taking care of yourself and your environment. But something like rheumatoid arthritis, it has a different disease label, but the reality is it just has a little bit different presentation. Do I have to necessarily know exactly what's going on in order to call something rheumatoid arthritis? No, not necessarily, but the people making the positive claim that they know something's rheumatoid arthritis over something like osteoarthritis are claiming that it's rheumatoid arthritis based off of antibody profiles and whether something is seronegative or seropositive. And those all have to do with tests that are happening outside the human body. And so these people are making positive claims about things that are happening inside the human body when they're not able to actually go inside the human body and see what exactly is going on. This is the problem with modern science as a whole, because the germ theory has riddled modern science with disease labels. It's riddled it everywhere. It even comes into play with like my own diagnosis from the age of 10, tuberous sclerosis complex. TSC for short. Essentially, TSC, I was diagnosed with this thing and I was traumatized by it. It gave me a depression, and I essentially cling to this disease label because, I got a rash on my back, and I got, stuff going on in regards to symptoms. My nails crack, unfortunately, and so they say that the reason why I have this disorder is because of a genetic mutation on like my 9th chromosome, I think is what it was. But the reality is if you ask them to isolate an amino acid of adenine, guanine, uracil, DNA, RNA, if you ask them to isolate DNA, RNA, they can't actually do it. Show me a nucleotide is what friends in my terrain camp have been saying over the last several years. Show me a nucleotide. Show me a nucleotide. And at first, I was like, well, I've learned about nucleotides since I was in like 5th grade science. The thing is, we learn about science in a dogmatic nature. Education itself is dogmatic. You're told how to think, you're told what to think, not how to actually critically think. You're not taught to question anything. You're taught to eat it all up as fact and then take a test on it on a multiple choice exam and then act like it's all true. When in reality, you're just told to regurgitate certain information without actually questioning the reality behind this and the claims, the positive claims that are behind these answers. And when you get into the philosophical thought, when you get into looking into logical fallacies, like one that I've mentioned, begging the question, affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent is one of the most common logical fallacies that there are today. My favorite example from Dr. Jordan Grant is the unicorn logical fallacy, where I was walking in the woods and I found hoof prints. So if I see hoof prints, then Y occurs. So Y would be a unicorn exists if I see hoof prints in the woods. Well, you might be thinking, well, Justin, isn't that kind of crazy to say that? I mean, obviously there's a horse, obviously something like a goat, something like a donkey could be what causes those hoof prints. Well, yeah, and so that's the reality behind the question asking of germ theory itself and what actually makes us sick and health itself. How do you know? How do you know? Did you see the unicorn make those hoof prints? No, because nobody's isolated a unicorn unless it's in the dream world. And so the virus comes from the dream world, essentially. You've been told a story and you've been eating it up since you were about 5 years old. So it's about time you stop believing in Santa Claus, my friends, because it's about the same exact analogy. It's just you're listening to people in white lab coats and goggles and people who use pipettes. But as someone who comes from a scientific background and studied pharmaceutical and biomedical sciences, and I used to work in the vaccine industry at Pfizer as a formulation analytical scientist, I could tell you from my firsthand experience that these people have no idea what they're doing in the lab. They're following orders to make a paycheck, and they're not critically thinking whatsoever. When I was working on this COVID-19 so-called vaccine, that's really a death poison shot that caused harm to millions of people across this earth, we weren't working with the virus to see if this vaccine was doing anything effective in stability studies. All we were doing was testing for shelf life stability. And when I asked questions about this thing causing harm to people that I knew, or that my mother knew, my manager's boss and my higher up boss told me, oh, people die every day, Justin. It's not our jobs to think about this. I said, what the heck do you mean, man? This is a real world clinical trial that's taking place. And it really had me start to question everything. When that was Ramin Daivari, when Conwalt Gill was saying things like, this is turning into a money game. Yeah, we're making this all about the RNA technology. You know, we were working on the RNA technology because of the flu shot, and then we came up with this fake scamdemic in 2019 just so that we can implement this RNA technology that Pfizer was working on in 2017 and 2018 with this BioNTech company from Germany with Ugur Sahin. He reached out to Albert Bourla to work together. He said, yeah, we can make it big. And they needed an excuse to come up with a so-called gene therapy that nobody would have injected themselves with unless they were under a spell of fear-based propaganda from the media, from the CIA media, right? The media itself is all about central intelligence and mind control, guys. It's all about TikTok, all about look at this, look at that, versus getting centered and being coherent in your own reality. It's literally about controlling your mind so that you don't wake up to the fact that this system that has been presented to us does not work in our favor. They have billions of people sucked into this system that is falling apart as we speak right now. And they're about to do a great reset. That's what Trump just said on Twitter. He said, we're getting ready for the greatest reset in the history of the world. Well, that's the same World Economic Forum Great Reset, from my perspective, that has been talked about since 2020 from Klaus Schwab in the World Economic Forum and Yuval Harari. The people who want to basically make us all eat crickets and want us all to have a universal basic income and want us to be energy slaves, essentially, and, you know, calls us useless eaters. Well, guess what? God created you and I with a purpose. We all have a purpose on this earth. Is it necessarily to work a 9-to-5 that you hate and slave away at a job that you hate, at a desk that you hate for 50, 60 years of your life just so you can retire with a pension or a 401k and go on vacation and be retired for 10 years? I don't think so. So, yeah, full circle, this conversation started with talking about the germ theory and why it's fraudulent. But when you start to poke holes into what makes you sick, you can start to poke holes into everything, and then you can't really go back. You can't really go back at all. You know why? Because it litters across the entire reality that has been presented to us in this realm. And so, no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I literally love you, and I'm putting my neck out there and putting my voice out there because I know it's the right thing to do and talk about things that might be a little bit hard to talk about because based off my human experience, there's no going back. And so, peace and love to all who've made it this far. I appreciate you guys for listening. Any comments, leave them in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and give me a follow subscribe and share this video if you learned something. Peace and love.